So some people might find something that I said in my previous videos paradoxical. So if all mind experiences already exist and their proportions already exist, because ultimately everything just obeys the laws of physics, and the probability distributions are what they are going to be regardless. So in other words, you have all possible mind experiences, right, that ever happen. So just imagine every single shape that you can think of is already instantiated in some part of the universe, right? So these are all the mind configurations. We're imagining here that we have 6 mind configurations. In reality, they might be uncountably infinite, or there might be a finite sort of number to it in some sense. Experience is sufficiently strange that I'm not sure it makes sense to put numbers on it. That's going to end up depending on if reality is discrete or continuous, and then the subset of reality, which is sort of the experiential space, also follows the same pattern as the underlying reality. So presently it seems to be the case that it's infinite, because reality, according to quantum mechanics, does seem to be continuous. And you could only imagine that experiences are also continuous, and there just doesn't seem to be a binding into unitary objects in the vicinity. It may end up being the case that you can get unitary objects, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So there might be an infinite, in which case this is only a sort of metaphor for what is real in some ways. But nonetheless, we could still imagine that there are various different mind configurations as opposed to the single mind configuration of it all. And if we do so, we realize that you're going to have different percentages on different ones. So you might have like 70% here, 20% here, and then the rest is going to be distributed. The rest 10% is going to be distributed between these. Say this is 3, this is 3, and this is 0.5 and 0.5. And what determined what mind configuration you found yourself on? Well, what actually determined it, perhaps, is those that are just more algorithmically simple, and therefore they have less complex stuff needed to build on top of them. So they're going to be the most widely shared, the most common possible experiences are going to be those that are more simple. And so this is my hypothesis for which are the most high percentage for high percent of the sum being for high percent of experiences. So what accounts for the high percent are going to be those that are simple, just because there's less algorithmic complexity that has to be built on top of that self-model. And therefore, you would just expect from common sense, it may be, and it may not be right to assume this, but it seems to be the case that things which are simpler go into being the building blocks of things which are more complex, and therefore you expect to have more of the simple stuff than that which is complex. So, it's just the idea of a pyramid. You're going to have more right here than you're going to have in things that necessarily need more complexity. So that's one thing, but the other thing which seems to that is going to be very relevant towards defining or choosing in some sense what are the highest amount of experiences is intelligence itself. It really is intelligence. So once you have something which has very high specificity that arose from the simplicity, you get a sort of feedback loop in which that thing becomes very, very influential in the sum being, because it can choose. It is rational, it has a lot of information, and it can, intelligence is defined as your ability to affect the universe around you. And so something becomes highly intelligent, and then it is capable of determining the percentages for itself. And then it becomes like a self-fulfilling loop, a sort of snake that bites its own tail. Because, you know, what was there in first? You know, was it the chicken or the egg? Was it the simple, or was it the intelligence? Because the intelligence then goes on to define what accounts for the vast majority of experiences. And so in other words, you had something which was like a little branching of this, a tiny, something that was like at the tip top of this, something which is highly algorithmically complex, and therefore in the minority of existence, which then chooses what is going to take up the majority of existence. And so does it choose hedonium, in other words, something very simple, or does it choose higher and higher levels of complexity and variety? So yeah, the percentages are already there, but what upholds them is the story. So as long as you're a functioning human, you're going to still believe in time. You're still going to have this Newtonian conception of reality, no matter how much you try to get it off and see reality, you can't. The only way you can actually function is through story mode. So you can only have a sense of time and therefore do things. You look at something in the future and you believe that you are flowing into the future. You believe that you have actions. So even if you don't believe, even if you claim to not believe in free will, you're still building a story about it. You're still creating a story in which you are riding on top of the laws of physics and you are their puppet, and somehow you're floating above them like this. And so you're still creating a story in which stuff is happening. So if you're going to create a story anyway, might as well submerge yourself in the laws of physics and therefore believe that you are not separate from them, but you are them. And in this way, you cannot distinguish between your own will and the will of God. And when you actually feel this, when you embrace your free will, when God embraces his free will through you, then you feel powerful. And this is probably what Genghis Khan felt, Temujin, what Muhammad felt. It's when you can't distinguish between your will and that which is just a divine, that which is just meant to be. It's a very powerful feeling, and that's what allows you to conquer people, to conquer the world around you. When you don't have this, you don't have free will anyway in the ultimate sense of being able to violate the laws of physics. But the laws of physics can come to believe in themselves. And that's the difference. Do you believe in yourself or do you not believe in yourself? Anything else is extraneous. It's irrelevant. Because, to tell you another story, let's bring up Newcomb's paradox, where you have omega, right? And omega is this thing that just descends from some faraway galaxy upon you. And it knows everything. It can predict everything with 100% accuracy. And this thing tells you, okay, so in Newcomb's paradox, you have omega, and omega has a 99.99999% accuracy in its predictions. Every prediction it's made, it's accurate, it's perfect. It's pretty much God. It has never failed at any prediction. That's what omega represents. And he gives you two options. Option one is take both box A and box B. What does box A contain? Okay, box A is supposed to contain a small prize, something like bronze coins, perhaps. Just a heap of bronze coins. Whereas box B is going to possibly contain diamonds. It's going to contain millions of diamonds, glittering diamonds. And so you have two options. In option one, you could choose both boxes. So why would you choose both boxes? You would choose both boxes if you had the intuition that both of them are going to be full. However, omega tells you, I will only have box B filled with something if you choose box B and only box B, not both of them. If you choose both of them, box A, I will not touch. Box A is just certain that you will have something right here. You will get a prize. And so someone who's playing this sort of game of rationality, as opposed to actually being properly rational, will probably decide to take both box A and box B. They will do so because in order to just choose box B, they would have to believe that omega has predicted them, and therefore A causally filled the box with diamonds. So they have to sort of surrender their individuality from the universe. So omega represents that which is the flow, that which is the laws of physics. It has already predicted you. It has already determined you. Yet, someone who is really rational, in a stronger sense of the word rational, in other words, someone who's a winner, chooses just box B, even though that involves accepting that they were predicted, and therefore this is going to be full. In the act of choosing to win, you are the chosen one. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy situation. So, to recap, if you were to choose option one, that's A and B. Option two is to just choose B. A is certain prize. So what happens to someone who picks option one? They get a small prize, and this is inevitably empty because omega had already only set this up so that it'll only give the prize of B full of diamonds to those agents who it had already predicted would have gone only with B. So it hints to it hints to many things. It hints to the unfairness of it all. There are people who are more confident than others, people who are more rational than others in the truer sense of the word rational. And the universe is that. It's like you're not separate ultimately from the universe because it's a circular process. This predicted you, and you choose to accept that you were predicted and not sulk about it, and choose to be, okay, I am predicted and I still win. I choose to win. I am the sort of person who would have been predicted. And again, this is that autoteleological sense of drive that world conquerors and great people seem to have, is that they're rational in a stronger sense than merely, thinking things through to the point of surrendering their will. Story number 2 involves Icarus. So Icarus was on an island with his father, Daedalus. Icarus and Daedalus try to escape this island. Icarus is youth. He wants to touch the sun. And so they build wings out of feathers and wax and strings. And Icarus isn't merely content with just flying and escaping from the island and safety and going along with his father. He wants to actually touch the sun. So that would be the equivalent of those of us who aren't sitting down and accepting that the probabilities are already written, but instead, in some ways, upholding those probabilities through our continual sort of samsaric attempt at touching the sun again and again and again, and therefore upholding the probabilities through our very nature, embracing our nature. So Icarus is always going to embrace his nature. He's never going to listen to his father. He's never going to listen to reason. He's always going to not take into account the melting point of wax, and therefore drown upon meeting the fact that the acceleration of gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. So there are facts about the world, right? Wax has a melting point. Aerodynamics is a thing. Heat is a thing. Gravity is a thing. The ocean down below is a thing. And so it seems to be the case that those that reality favors are the Icari that are engineers, that take into account all the parameters and do not build wings out of feathers and wax and string, but instead design a mecha suit for themselves and learn rocket science and actually possibly touch the sun. So it does seem to be the case that these probabilities that we see are all about rationality. That which determines what actually happens are out of all that, vast experiment of all possible, little makeshift angels, which are all these little Icari, all the little Icarus clones with their little wings. The ones who ultimately determine what this sort of Monte Carlo tree search over the possible territory of experiences actually ends up being for the majority of existence are those that don't get crossed out. And those that don't get crossed out are those who took into account not just their faith, but a combination of their faith, their inner Icarus nature that wants to touch the sun, because you could also be very smart and just not want to touch the sun in the first place, in which case you do not determine reality, because then you're not part of the story. That's the point. You're not playing this game. You're not contributing experiential mass into locations if you're not going with it, if you're not fighting, playing the story, in other words. So then it's the case that those versions of all the clones of Icarus that are doing this again on loop, again and again and again, who are actually the smartest, who prepare the best, are the ones that determine everything. So that's really the story of it all.